I personally think I've counted 8 books of yours, including a book on China and about 4 books on Kashmir.
You're being very kind. It's only 6 books.
All right. So this is the 7th.
This is the 6th.
This is the 6th.
one.
Okay.
This is the 6th.
And we have Subroto with us today. This book on Bangladesh, after a couple of readings, I personally think, having read other books, a number of other books, including the one we published a couple of years back, was probably a definitive book on Bangladesh, covering pretty much the military part, which is your contribution, and the geopolitical or geoeconomic part of how Bangladesh came to be. So I'll just hand over the mic to both the authors, and we'll start with Iqbal, if you want to just say a few words, and then I'll start with the questions that I've read.
I am actually delighted to be here. I've always wanted to come to the Kunzum bookstore, and my wish has been fulfilled today. And I hope it's a very vibrant and interesting discussion, and people all over the world can hear what we have to say about the book and answer all of Anirudh's penetrating questions, which I'm sure he's going to unleash very soon. Over to Subroto.
Well, I'd like to thank Anirudh and Praveen, our publishers. They've been absolutely fantastic as publishers. We never acknowledge our publishers, but they've been very, very good, along with Len, who's not here. And I was absolutely terrified when the book was launched, because I thought, I was very worried as to what people would say. I'm very pleased to share that people who have read the book seem to have liked it. That pleases me, because it's work. Iqbal is an accomplished author, and his scholarship is way more than mine. But for me, I started in the basement, so it took me about 8 years to put this book together. And before we get on to the book, Iqbal saw my messy drafts, as Praveen would vouch, and he made it into something which was readable. So I'll always be grateful to him, and he was very gracious. And I would just like to say one thing, that I think creation of Bangladesh is an epic. I don't think something like that has ever happened in the history. And when people compare it to other wars, I say that only come back if India was to liberate Tibet, or at least reintegrate POK into India. Besides these two, I don't think you can compare liberation of Bangladesh and India's role with any other event, as it were. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Would you just hold the book up for the camera?
Yeah,
and
sure.
take Iqbal, please. And I'll hold my copy, which I have made dog-eared now, with at least a couple of readings. Okay. All right. So to the questions that I have for both. I mean, it's not in any particular sequence, but I have tried to stick to the questions of. So the first part of the book is written by Iqbal, and that's, as I said earlier, it addresses the geopolitics of the formation of the country of Bangladesh. And the second part is written by Subroto, which is basically to do with the military history part of it. So my first question, and which is something that really intrigued me even as the publisher, and the first thing I noticed was the title. And they have placed Humiliation before they have placed Carnage, which as somebody whose parents come from the areas that are going to be discussed, we were always under the impression, and I was just growing up, single-digit years at that point of time. And what comes to our mind, and what the headlines of the newspapers, I remember I was in Patna, and as I think 9-year-old, I saw the newspaper called Searchlight, and the headlines on 3rd of December was India declares war. So for us, it is more of carnage. And would any one of you care to tell us, why have you placed Humiliation before Carnage and Chaos?
I think Subroto chose the title, but I can just, to start off, I can say that when Pakistan was formed and East Pakistan became a political entity within the ambit of Pakistan, the East Pakistanis had more people than West Pakistan, but West Pakistan was actually the nucleus of the new country. And there was a lot of racism involved because the West Pakistanis were Punjabis and some of them were Pathans, and they were all fair. And there is a great premium on fairness in the Indian subcontinent. And the Bengalis, they considered to be dark and skinny and sufferers of the 1943 Bengal famine, which was created by the great Winston Churchill. But that's a different story. So there was this element of racism, there was this element of control, and the fact that East Pakistan was a subject colony of West Pakistan. And also, I think that the issue of language was also very important, and the unwillingness to share political power on the basis of equality and mutual respect. So the attempt was always to humiliate the Bengalis. But here's the paradox, that four of the leaders of Pakistan were Bengalis and Bengali politicians. And the most infamous one was Iskandar Mirza, who in fact paved the way for military rule after he was unseated by Ayub, with whose help he came to power. So here you had the Bengalis running Pakistan, yet they were willing to accept the subjugation and the dehumanization of their fellow Bengalis. So it was a very weird sort of contradiction. And once the Pathans and the Punjabis took power in 1958, the humiliation intensified, whether it was on the account of language, or it was on the account of culture, or it was on the account of sharing resources. So they felt that they could continue to exploit the Bengalis, and the seeds of that exploitation then began to manifest them itself in revolt. And then we come to another part of the story. So let's hear Subroto's point of view as well, because he chose the title. I'm just giving you the backstory.
Thanks, Iqbal.
Yeah, so I think I exactly what Iqbal said is the way it played out, because Pakistan was a country united by religion, but divided by language and culture, clearly. And the motivations for the partition in the East
And ethnicity.
and the motivations for partition in the East were different from the motivation for the partition in the West. In the East, Bengal was at some point in time about 5% of the world's GDP, but the wealth of Bengal was concentrated in the hands of the upper caste Hindus. And even now, you see a lot of Bengali literature and theatre and so on, where the peasants felt disempowered. So they felt that by separating from India, they would be able to get, certain social justice, as it were. In fact, in late 1940s, early 1950s, they carried out legislative action whereby they carried out land reforms. So the Bengali Hindus, their land was redistributed. There was a Rent Control Act which was brought in, whereby the Bengali Hindus who owned properties in Chittagong, Sylhet, and Dhaka, they couldn't transfer money into West Bengal. So while all this action happened in East Pakistan, in West Pakistan they didn't carry out land reforms. So the zamindaris of West Pakistan carry on even till now.
Yes.
But in East Pakistan they went and did it. But I think when Jinnah goes to Dhaka in 1948, if I remember right, he says that Urdu will be the national language.
Yes.
And that is when the East Pakistani politicians, and Mujib in particular, who had participated in the Direct Action Day, they woke up to the fact that there is something happening here which is different from what they had imagined. And then it just gets, it goes from bad to worse, as it were. And the story really gets very, very sort of sordid, because, as Iqbal said, this moves at a pretty fast pace. And Mujib gets arrested by Ayub Khan in the Agartala conspiracy case, which is because Ayub believed that he was in touch with Indian intelligence agencies in Agartala. And he's put into prison. There is someone who is killed in Dhaka Central Jail. East Pakistan explodes, and Mujib is released by Ayub. And at the same time, Ayub was losing control because of 1965, where he had promised that he will reclaim Kashmir through Operation Grand Slam and Gibraltar, which didn't happen. So the Pakistani public was a little, I mean, they had gone down that road just too far. And the Pakistani public didn't like the fact, and he loses his job to Yahya Khan. To be fair, Yahya reconfigures the political leadership in East Pakistan. He appoints Admiral Ehsan as the governor. He appoints Lieutenant General Yaqub Khan as the chief martial administrator. And he appoints Air Commodore Zafar Masood as the head of Pakistan Air Force in East Pakistan. And he calls for election. Iqbal.
No, I think we'll wait for Anirudh's
Okay.
other question.
Other
But I just wanted to make a point here that when you said that Jinnah said that Urdu will be the national language, but Jinnah himself was a Gujarati.
Yeah.
He was a Gujarati politician, and he was very comfortable in his original culture. But when he went to England, he became an Englishman. And then when he became an Islamist, then he adopted Urdu. So he had three personalities operating within one man. And even he was outnumbered because the major part of Pakistan was Punjab. And the majority of the population of West Pakistan was Punjabi. And even though Jinnah had this lofty title of Quaid-e-Azam, but the fact was that what did the Punjabis actually think about him? Because he broke up their homeland, and he broke them up into two parts, and they lost their power. So that's another issue which we haven't touched in this in our book, but I was tempted to talk about it because it's always been at the back of my mind.
That's an interesting segue to the conversation. But I just wanted to add that racism of Punjabis towards Bengalis is just not a Pakistani phenomena. Growing up in Moga in the 70s is a lived experience that I can vouch for. So anyway, getting on to the other question that I had in mind for you, Iqbal, this one particularly. So once you go through what you've written and whatever I have read earlier, between 47 and 71, one could see that there are sections of inevitability of Bangladesh or a new country where the Bengalis are given sovereignty happening in some form or the other. What, according to you, was the point of no return that you would personally say that, okay, this is the point beyond which there was no rapprochement possible?
See, discontent requires mobilization. And the first person to mobilize the discontent in East Pakistan was Sheikh Mujib. And even though Mujib started out as an Islamist and he was a communalist when he was in college, and he even participated in the Direct Action Day of 1946 in Calcutta. But he then realized that if he wanted to realize the aspirations of the Bengalis, of the Bengali nation, he would need India's help. And Mujib by then was probably being politically marginalized in East Pakistan, and he was evolving into more of a mature man from an angry young man. And his mobilization again was contingent upon Indian support. And one of the talent spotters of the Intelligence Bureau spotted him and then seduced him, and he convinced him that, look, they would work with him. And then that started the process of his letter to Pandit Nehru. And at that time, we were facing the China crisis. So Panditji couldn't respond. And Mujib pressed on even after the Chinese war. But then the project was pushed into the back burner. And then in 1965, we have this very dynamic Intelligence Bureau officer called Fanindranath Banerjee, who took on the nom de plume of P.N. Ojha, and he was the station chief of the IB in Dhaka. And that's when the real enrichment of this mobilization happened, when he and Mujib and Banerjee worked together. Now, we're not privy to the classified files, and we're not privy to all of that. These are inferences that we've drawn from the nuances in the story as it evolved, we do see that Bangladesh was a work in progress that just didn't suddenly happen in 1971, but it started in 1961 with the mobilization of these cadres of Mujib, and how an enterprising intelligence officer spotted him. And then they nurtured this whole journey, and then it turned out into independence for Bangladesh. So you look at 1947 and you look at 71, and you see that within the turmoil of partition, there was another turmoil happening, and there was a second partition. Now, then, of course, there are many reasons that actually triggered it off, and it was able to manifest itself into the form of a nation, a Bengali nation. But this process could not have happened without the assistance of the Indian state. And I think that the Indian state did a very good job, because the Pakistanis betrayed us in 1947 when, just after independence, they attacked Kashmir. And even though we gave them the waters, half of the waters of the Indus water system, they were not satisfied with that. And they had this issue of, first, the issue was an identity crisis, that how do you distinguish a Pakistani from an Indian? And that identity crisis was resolved by President Zia in post 1977, when he made this distinction, and he Islamized or Islamicized the society. To give an example, that before 77, in the Punjab, whether you were a Hindu or a Sikh or a Muslim, you refer to God as Rab. After 77, the Muslims stopped referring to God as Rab, and they began to refer to him as Allah. And so that distinction happened, and therefore the Pakistanis were able to evolve their own identity as distinct from mainstream India. So that was, an interesting another segue in this whole story. But to come back to the story of Mujib and his evolution, is very interesting to see how he transformed himself and he transformed his political philosophy. And after all, he hated the Hindu Bengalis, and then he had to work with them if he had to realize his dream. So the wheel came a full circle, and they then discovered their cultural roots that lay in unified Bengal. And if you look at the history of the subcontinent, and you look at the fact that the Punjab and Bengal were the two centers of very strong culture and militarism in many ways, because the revolutionary movement was there in Bengal, the Anushilan, and I forget the name of the other one, Yugantar. And in the Punjab, there was the Gadar party. So the British were aiming to destroy this homogeneity that existed in the Punjab and the Bengal if they had to secure their paramountcy in India. And that was their main motive. So if you look at this story, it's just not even from 1947, but it goes back to the partition of Bengal.
1905.
1905. And before that, the Punjab Land Alienation Act of 1900, and the Colonies Act, where once irrigation was brought into the Punjab. So you find that when the peoples of these states were suppressed, then they expressed themselves in their form of different forms of nationalism. And then the British tried to then break that nationalism and break it up into Hindu, Muslim, Sikh in Punjab and Hindu, Muslim in Bengal. Subroto.
So to go back to your question, I think there are a couple of points where things really didn't work out. First is that Mujib used to sarcastically say that the infrastructure of Islamabad is made out of the sale of jute from Bengal. And West Pakistan's wealth was concentrated, Pakistan's wealth was concentrated in the hand of 22 Punjabi families in West Pakistan. So this is a common narrative which they built. That's one. The second is that in December of 1970, there was a cyclone which hit East Pakistan, where about 500,000 people died. And the Pakistani state just didn't have the capacity to respond to their requirements. And Archer Blood, who is the Consul General of America, in Dhaka, he says that I can see the breakup of the country because mood was getting really. And then what happens is that Yahya Khan, to his credit, holds perhaps the most fair elections possible in East Pakistan. The army stays out of it. The elections are free and fair. And the results, contrary to the Intelligence Bureau reports of Pakistan, there was a gentleman called Mr. Rizvi, who was the head of Pakistan IB. He had said that the mandate would be fractured. But what ends up happening is that Awami League wins every single seat in East Pakistan, barring two, Mymensingh and Chittagong. Now, the moment that happens, Yahya Khan announces that Mujib would be the Prime Minister of Pakistan. And he announces that in February in Dhaka. But from Dhaka, he goes to Larkana, which is the hometown of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. And they go on a hunting trip with a bunch of generals. And they prevail upon him that this is not acceptable. So West Pakistani elite, Pakistan army, civil society, and the army take side in this whole thing. And they decide to postpone calling the National Assembly sine die. This happens in the 23rd or 24th of February 1971. East Pakistan explodes in violence. And to answer your question, that was the turning point. And Mujib holds a meeting in Hotel Purbani in Dhaka. And there is large-scale violence there. And as you well know, there are three people who resign. Who refuse to carry out the crackdown on the people of East Pakistan under an operation called Operation Blitz, which Rawalpindi had cleared. The first is Admiral Hassan, who was the former Pak Navy chief. He resigns. He says, I'm not going to carry out a crackdown on my own people. The second is Lieutenant General Yaqub Khan, who is from Rampur. He's an alum of RIMC, Dehradun, and IMA. He says, I'm not doing it. He goes back. And finally, Air Commodore Zafar Masood, Miti Masood, he dissents with Yahya and he is sacked. So three people resign. And I think this needs to be mentioned because there were these three Pakistani officers who didn't want to carry out violence. And they replace Yahya Khan, replaces Admiral Hassan with Lieutenant Tika Khan. And he instructs Khadim Hussain Raja to carry out the crackdown under something which Raja renames Blitz as Searchlight. And they crack down on the 25th of March. And they kill about 3 million people in a period of 9 months. They rape 200,000 women, according to the Australian doctor called Jeffrey Davis. And 10 million people come into India. And the whole thing caves in. And the Pakistanis, as Iqbal said, say that, it was the RNAW who carried, who were responsible for the creation of Bangladesh. And I tell the Pakistanis this, that there is a grain of truth in that. But, if you speak to senior intelligence officers, and there are some very senior civil servants who are sitting in the audience, we just didn't have the capacity to engineer 3 million kills and, 10 million refugees and 200,000 women. This is complete, it's a fantasy which the Pakistanis live in. True. And if you add what Iqbal said to what I say, that is what led to the final creation of
I want to make a point about the 1970 election because I think it's important to bring it out that Mujib wanted to fight the election, but I think the government of India or the Intelligence Bureau, because it's not clear whether Mr. Banerjee, who was the case officer was Mujib's case officer, had by then joined RAW, and whether he was still a IB asset or whether he was a RAW asset. And that's a semantic difference. But the fact is that he met Mrs. Gandhi in 1968, and she cleared the plan to allow him to participate in the elections because it was a very audacious move that an Indian asset might become the future Prime Minister of Pakistan. And he would be our man running the show. But what happened is that Mujib needed an assurance that he would become the Prime Minister of Pakistan, and that assurance could only be achieved if he could win this absolutely overwhelming majority of 162 out of 164 seats. And if he had to do that, that could only happen if the left, which was the main opponent of Mujib in East Pakistan, their cadres could be wiped out, or the leadership of their cadres could be wiped out, so that the popular base of the voters, enough voters would come in to actually tilt the scales in the Awami League's favor in the first past the post system. And that is really what happened, because without those 162 by 160 out of 164 seats, Mujib could not have gained the legitimacy to be either the Prime Minister of Pakistan or the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, which was still behind the curtains. So that is a very key factor, that we actually interfered in that election. That is what the research points to. I wasn't there. I was only 11 or 12 years old at that point of time. But the fact is that since Mujib was being handled by one of our intelligence officers, we played a role in that election in many ways. And we also attacked the left in Bangladesh so that their popular base could shift to the Awami League, which ensured that victory. So I think Anirudh has a question on that. We'll come to that.
So yeah, so you just preempted the my next question, which was about Operation Steeplechase. So either one of you can take it up. My question is that what one gets, the feeling one gets after reading your portion is that Operation Steeplechase was pretty much primarily responsible for doing exactly what you just said, made tilt the scales in Mujib's favor so much that kind of the decision of who's going to lead Bangladesh or the new country, whatever the name would be, was kind of never in doubt. So it completely shows an Indian hand in structuring the politics of Bangladesh.
I'll tell you how I heard about Operation Steeplechase. My first cousin was a journalist called Raj Bhagat, Tabbi Bhagat. And I spent 10 days in Kathmandu, in Nepal in 1990. And he and I were talking about the left movement in India. And he told me that when his father, that's my mother's brother, Lieutenant General P.S. Bhagat, was the Central Army commander in 1971, there were a number of Naxalites who were killed by these triple cordon operations by the Indian Army, the paramilitary forces. I can't remember this time whether it was the CRPF or the BSF and the West Bengal police. So that's when I first came to know about these coordinated killings of the Naxals. And then many years later, the story broke. And then I pieced it together very laboriously because I was very curious about this fact. And the subplot of Bangladesh was the elimination of the left. So in fact, Mrs. Gandhi achieved both the destruction of the Naxalite movement, which was an existential threat to the Indian state, and she also achieved the breakup of Pakistan, which was also an existential threat to the Indian state. So she actually killed two birds with one stone. And Operation Steeplechase was again I'll repeat myself, a triple cordon operation whereby whenever a left-wing, ultra-left Naxalite or CPI ML hamlet was discovered, with about 200, 300, 400 cadres, the army would surround it. Then the inner cordon would be the paramilitary force, whether it was the CRPF or the BSF. And in the third cordon, there'd be the West Bengal police who would go in and actually kill them all. So the idea was to completely liquidate them. Now, interestingly, when the CPI ML was formed and Charu Mazumdar assumed the leadership of the Marxist-Leninist Party, he gained inspiration from the Bangladesh Marxist-Leninist Party in East Pakistan, which was run by a very charismatic young leader called Siraj Sikdar. And Siraj Sikdar initiated the program of killing Hindu Bengali landlords and the upper class gentry in the rural areas. And this formed the basis of Charu Mazumdar's concept of Khatam Rajniti, where you finish politics and you collectivize the people by mass killings of all the landlords in the area that comes under your control. And this is what they were doing in the Midnapur district of West Bengal in 1969, 70, 71, when the movement was at its height. So the story goes that when Mrs. Gandhi was very perturbed by this, she sent General Manekshaw and Mr. Who was it, Govindarayan, I think, to Calcutta to meet with Jacob, because they wanted to conduct, or rather initiate, an off-the-books black operation whereby this whole thing would be very secret, and the army commander, General Rora, was not there. He had gone to Kalimpong on a holiday. Jacob says that he wanted written authorization, and Sam Manekshaw said, this is off the books. There will be no written authorization. You better get your act together. So the government of India had to wait till they had a favorable governor in the form of S.S. Dhawan, who introduced a British law dating back to the 1930s, which took care of terrorist and violent activities. They invoked that law, and then they went on this crackdown. Now, during the course of the crackdown, the army mobilized 90,000 troops, which they seconded to Operation Steeplechase, and these troops went in hit and run or hot pursuit operations into East Pakistan. And in the course of those operations, they wiped out a lot of the cadres of the East Pakistan Marxist-Leninist Party, because there was cross-fertilization not only of ideas between the two Bengals, but there was cross-fertilization of communist cadres. And ultimately, after Mujib came to power in 1974-75, I think he had Siraj Sikdar killed, because Sikdar was probably the main opponent of Mujib, and Mujib hated his guts. So Steeplechase was the cover under which the Indian army had already moved to the borders, and already these operations were on, and already there were contacts with the Awami League cadres. So between the Indian security forces and the Awami League cadres, and their common enemy was the left, and the elimination of the top echelon of the left-wing cadres allowed for the popular base of the left, a part of it, to shift to the Awami League, that enabled them to win those seats in parliament. But you must remember that still only 40% of the population of East Pakistan voted for Bangladesh. 60% didn't want to leave Pakistan. And that is a very interesting figure. And if you actually get into that, you will find that the remnants of those 60% are the fellows who revolted against Sheikh Hasina 2 years ago. And are part of this whole revival of the Islamicism in the country.
That's a great insight, Iqbal. That takes me to another very important point, which I have always wondered upon, and you've touched upon it briefly. This brings us to the April 70-71. This is Searchlight is fully on, and mass killings are going on in and around Dhaka. And Mrs. Gandhi asks Sam Manekshaw to intervene, and he refuses. Now, the counterfactual question or history is that, had Sam Manekshaw agreed to go in when Mrs. Gandhi asked him to go in, do you think he would have saved almost a lot of the 3 million people who got killed, or the women who got raped? Is that something that where, by delaying the operation from April to December, actually 21st November to be precise, the first tank battle took place, but 3rd December, the official war declaration, could people have been saved?
Well, I think this is just not true. This narrative which has been built is just not true, because three things. If you read the newspaper headlines starting February, March, April, it was the opposition which was mounting pressure on Mrs. Gandhi to carry out these operations. And a couple of things we should know. China, Russia and the United States did not want Pakistan to break up. So there was no question of India breaking up East Pakistan as early as April. It was just not possible. Uh, the other thing is that General Manekshaw, contrary to popular opinion, I have seen his recordings. He was in no position to move. He needed time. But more importantly, they worked in lockstep, and he says that I trusted my prime minister and my prime minister trusted me. So this whole narrative about Sam Manekshaw is just not true. That's one. The second thing is that Mrs. Gandhi had a very, very formidable group of people on her team. She had Sam Manekshaw, she had Admiral Nanda, she had Air Marshal P.C. Lal, she had Mr. Huxer, she had T.N. Cole, she had fantastic ambassadors, P.N. Dhar. Then she had D.P. Dhar. Then she had, sorry? Yeah, correct. But they were very good. And then she had three outstanding people in the police service. She had Mr. Rustamji, she had Mr. Atma Jairam, who was head of Intelligence Bureau, she had Mr. Ramnath Kao. She had a fantastic set of civil servants from the Indian Administrative Service. So she had a great team. Now, what they do is that they decide to create a government in exile, which moves really quickly. First thing is on the 15th of April. Now, Searchlight is 25th of March. 15th April, Hossein Ali, who is the Consul General of Pakistan in Calcutta, he is persuaded by the BSF, and they have a dinner meeting at this hotel Gaylord, which is on the Strand in Calcutta. And they persuade Hossein Ali to shift across to the incoming government in exile, and he agrees. They take Tajuddin Ahmed to meet him. Mr. Golok Majumdar was there in that meeting. He writes about it. And on the 17th, the BSF arranges a meeting, the swearing in of the Bangladesh government in exile in a place called Boidyanath Tala. They take the entire international press. It is within the borders of East Pakistan, and the government in exile is sworn in. And the first prime minister and the wartime prime minister, a formidable man called Tajuddin Ahmed, a man who's a statesman. He really is someone we should study carefully. He becomes the first prime minister and the wartime prime minister of Bangladesh. The head of defense is a man called Colonel M.A.G. Osmani, highly respected Bengali officer from the Supply Corps. He had retired. He was about 51 years old. He was also a legislator who had won the election in previous December. He becomes the defense minister, and they start this government of exile in Calcutta. The reason I say this is that the BSF is put under the command of the Eastern Command, and they set up 5 camps to train guerrillas: Alpha, Bravo, Delta, Charlie, Delta, and FJ. Delta camp is run by Brigadier Shahbeg Singh. All these camps are run by officers of rank of a brigadier. And Brigadier Shahbeg Singh is the one who gets killed in Golden Temple a few years later. And there is one camp run by the Navy in a place called Plassey, 170 kilometers north of Calcutta. And 2 camps are run by Major General Sujan Singh Uban, who had raised the Tibetan forces. He raises these things. And these camps are run in the name of the Bangladesh government in exile, because we had a constraint under the United Nations Charter, Article 2, where you cannot interfere in a neighboring country. So you have to understand this whole thing that we went in and we'll do this. Any, sort of informed civil servant, and we have one sitting here, will tell you these things don't happen like that. I mean, it's far more complicated. And Manekshaw was in lockstep with Mrs. Gandhi. These camps were run under his command. So the Indian military got in with the Mukti Bahini right from the month of April. This is the first thing. The second thing is the movement almost collapsed because, as Iqbal said, 60% of the population had not voted for Awami League, and out of them there were people who did not want to secede from Pakistan for the very reason that they had supported the partition of India. The CIA and the ISI infiltrate the government in exile. They get into touch with Khandakar Mushtaq, who was their foreign minister, and that man almost agreed that we'll get into some kind of an arrangement with the Pakistanis. The movement almost capsized. That was stopped based on intelligence inputs by the West Bengal police and the Calcutta police because of inputs that they got. In fact, there was an assassination attempt on Tajuddin Ahmed. That office used to operate from 8th Theatre Road, which is Sri Aurobindo's birthplace. It was a BSF facility. And we normally don't talk about all these people like P.N. Banerjee, Golok Mojumdar. There were a whole host of West Bengal cadre IS officer, IPS officers who had all participated in this operation. So to answer your question, it is, and the Bangladeshis say this to us all the time, that you don't talk about, what we did, because the Mukti Bahini got mobilized from the month of April, May, June. They lost people. 30% of them got killed, and they were trained by Indian officers and men. And Captain Samant has written this book with Sandeep Unnithan about the camp run by the Navy called Operation X. And I was talking to Sandeep the other day. He said that, I said, what about the other 5 camps? He says the documents are not available, which is a tragedy, and including the camps run by General Uban. Now, there's another thing that, Awami League during that period turned around and said all the Mukti Bahini volunteers have to be Awami League cadres. So they were excluding everyone else in this movement. So DP Dhar comes down to Calcutta. He meets them. He says that you have to bring everybody together. This is not an Awami League fight against, for independence, as it were. So that story is another very sordid story, which we normally don't talk about. And the Indian Army was in, and according to General Niazi's autobiography, he knew, if you read his autobiography, General Niazi knew exactly what the Indians were doing in these camps and so on. And he says that they really degraded our ability. But according to Niazi, Indian regular army was also mixed with the, with the Mukti Bahini. And if you read those stories, I mean, they were really brave. I mean, these boys, these Mukti Bahini commandos who were the naval, who were in the naval camp in Plassey, they blew up. I mean, and I have seen records of the insurance companies in London. They panicked at the rate at which they were destroying assets, because the insurance industry in London really panicked because of the damage these people were causing. So to answer your question, yes, the Indian Army went in on the 21st of November in the Battle of Garibpur and Boira, or before that in Dhalai. But the point is that the Indian Army was in from April. So this myth needs to be blown, as it were.
So that kind of leads me nicely on to another question. And I have a lot of friends in Bangladesh, and most of them have always asserted, and I have kept a studied silence, is that according to most of the Bangladeshi intellectuals or even businessmen I have met, their understanding is that Mukti Bahini was instrumental in liberation of East Pakistan into Bangladesh, and Indian Army's role was merely peripheral at best. So how would you two react to
I
that?
can answer that question because I've studied that in detail. They are absolutely right that the Mukti Bahini's role in this was pivotal. In the month of July, because the movement was not doing well, General Manekshaw carries out a structural change. He appoints a man from Central Indian Horse, an Armored Corps regiment. His name was Major General B.N. Sarkar. And General Sarkar was, originally he came from a family of zamindars in East Pakistan. He knew the terrain well. He was the one who ran the camps and so on. And there is absolutely no doubt, if you read the Pakistani accounts, the Mukti Bahini had pretty much degraded the Pakistani army. It was an integrated strategy which the Indian military had worked out. They knew that this is what is going to happen. They could not get in themselves. But had it been left entirely to Mukti Bahini, I would think it would have carried on for maybe a year or two with some amount of uncertainty and a much larger loss of life. So at some point in time, I will also suggest to you how this whole thing changed, and the Indian Army said that now we'll go in. And incidentally, when the war was fought from the 21st of November, on the 6th, it was formalized that General Arora would be the commander-in-chief of both the Indian and the Bangladeshi forces. So this is something which people miss, that he took charge of both the Indian and Bangladeshi forces, which carried on till the 16th of December. So
I think the fact is that you can't underplay the role of the Indian Army and the Indian military, because after all, who provided the training and who provided the direction and who provided the organization of the armaments of the Mukti Bahini. And the fact is that the strategy of using the Mukti Bahini was actually the same strategy that Pakistan used against us in the 1947-1965 war of sending the Mujahids into Kashmir. Operation Gibraltar. So we did the Gibraltar on them. We sent our own Mujahids there to actually attack the Pakistan army. And the fact is that any kind of popular uprising like this, any kind of guerrilla movement, any kind of mass movement cannot sustain itself without supply chains. It cannot sustain itself without direction, guidance, political support. All of that was provided by us. So I would rather say, as Subroto said finally, that it was an integrated effort, and the Mukti Bahini was a important part of this integrated effort. But do not underestimate the role, the political role of bringing the Russians in. Do not underestimate the political role of canvassing all over the world and gaining support and gaining press support and the support of pivotal countries like Britain and France, who had more to lose than the Americans. And that's why they came on board. Before the Americans came, the Americans were bankrolling the Pakistanis for their bridge to China. And so I think that we need to be very objective about it, because we can't be emotional and say, or jingoistic or too ultra-nationalistic and say, no, this side didn't carried all the cards or the other side didn't. I think without India, Bangladesh would never have been born. And the whole process was a work in progress. And yes, the Mukti Bahini played a key role, and they were tremendously aggrieved. The East Bengalis were tremendously aggrieved with what was happening to them. And it was an explosion, a manifestation of 25 years of suffering that they'd suffered against the hands of the West Pakistanis. But without all of the organizational skills provided by India, Bangladesh wouldn't have been a reality. That's my view.
Okay, that understood. So, just wanted to check with the two of you. One of the questions that has always that I have personally always wondered about is three of the most important people, going by exactly what you just said about the pivotal role played by Mukti Bahini and the pivotal role played by the in exile government of Bangladesh. How were people like General Oban to start with? Then Brigadier, finally Major General Shabik Singh, who ran one of the most important camps, and then the Prime Minister in exile, Tajuddin Ahmed. How were these three people almost obliterated from the records in terms of their giving them their due, both in India as well as in Bangladesh? Would you two like to comment on any one of these? Why? What happened to them?
I'll first I'll leave Tajuddin Ahmed for Subroto. I'll comment on Shabik Singh and General Oban. Shabik Singh was obliterated because Shabik Singh was a traitor. He crossed over to Bhindranwale's side and he waged war against the Indian state. And therefore, he has been completely erased from the history books because of that act on his part. And I think he retired as a Major General. Right. And General Oban, I had an occasion to meet him and talk to him many years ago. I think it was in 1992. And we talked about how he had been selected, in fact, by the British, who felt that because of his participation in the long-range desert group during the Second World War, where they carried out sabotage behind German lines, he was then selected to head the Special Frontier Force, which was set up by the CIA in just around the time of the Sino-Indian War of 1962. It was then called SFF, Establishment 22. And so General Oban was a very charismatic guy, and I think the issue is that no one has actually... because it was all very hush-hush and it was all classified. He, for some reason, I don't think he ever wrote his autobiography, and no one has actually studied General Oban's role. because all of that information is still classified. When you find that it's difficult for an army chief to now write his memoirs and have them published, what about someone who participated in such clandestine operations? But General Oban was a very modest man, and I spent a very interesting 3 hours talking to him about his role in the 71 war. And I think he's one of the unsung heroes of that conflict, because he created the basis for the guerrilla warfare and led it, or sort of catalyzed it to its successful end.
Mostly operating in the Chittagong hill tracts,
Yes.
if I'm not mistaken.
Subroto will talk
Tajuddin.
about Ahmed.
No, so I think my understanding, having done this, is that it was a very large cast, and my view is that in India we kind of pick up a few people and make heroes out of them. It was an extremely large cast. There were a very large number of commanders, and the war doesn't. So what we have been attempting to do is that we show what everybody did and how important that was to the overall, conflict objectives, as it were. General Oban trained these Mukti Bahini guerrillas on one hand, and on the other, during the war, he got deployed to the Chittagong Hill Tracts because the Indian Army had withdrawn their forces to fight the war. And that applied to Brigadier Shah Beg, it applied to Brigadier Salik, it applied to Brigadier Sant Singh. They were all there. So I would like to mention that in India, we try to pick up one or two people and make heroes out of them. I think everybody played a role. And so far as Tajuddin Ahmed is concerned, I think he was the Prime Minister, the wartime Prime Minister of Bangladesh. He has also, in this whole, sort of league tables, has been kind of, he doesn't get his due. But I don't think the war would have gone the way it did had it not been for Tajuddin Ahmed. Whenever things went wrong, he was in lockstep with Delhi, along with Group Captain Khandkar, who was the Deputy Chief of Staff. They were a bunch of people. They didn't want to fight under the Indians. They didn't want their role to be diminished. But I think Tajuddin Ahmed is someone who I would say deserves not only credit, but he needs to be studied more.
So another, I wouldn't say unsung, but most of the people who follow Indian military history would have heard of him, but the general public has not. Can you throw some light on the on the success of the Meghna drop and Sagat Singh's role in the entire capture of Dhaka on 16th of December?
Yeah, so Sagat Singh actually is someone so I have been accused of the fact that, we have highlighted Sagat Singh, and it is not possible. Our book is not a book about war stories. It's a story about liberation of Bangladesh and some part of it. Now, Sagat Singh starts off as a trooper in Bikaner State Forces. He fights the Second World War. He is there as a para officer in the liberation of Goa. In Nathula, he was the one who sort of fired back at the Chinese using artillery, very similar to what General Naravane has spoken, but we can take that offline. And then he almost gets fired because he's not supposed to use artillery. But General Manekshaw comes to his support, and he then becomes the 101 Com Zone commander. And then General Manekshaw decides, in my opinion, that he would be the 4 Corps, he'll be the Corps Commander 4 Corps. So there are 3 corps of the Indian Army which encircle Bangladesh. There's 4 which comes in from Agartala. He comes down from, they are fighting east-west. Then there is General T.P. Rayana, who's fighting Krishnanagar east. And there is General Thapan, who is 33 Corps in Siliguri. They were all outstanding officers. The first battle plans were planned out in April when Jacob sends in a proposal. The Indian Army rehashes, the Army headquarters rehashes the plan. There's a very able officer who is the director MO. His name is General Inder Gill. And they work the plan out. He has a deputy called Brigadier Sukhwant Singh, who has left a majestic book, which we have quoted in our narration. And General Sukhwant Singh, in fact, meets Sagat, and he says that, why don't you consider going to Dhaka? And Sagat says that, is Delhi serious, or are you wasting my time? Because nobody believed that they could cross the Meghna. But on the 28th of October, General Arora goes to 4 Corps headquarters in Teliamuri, and that is there in Sagat's biography. And this plan is hatched. But let me put it to you this way, that neither Mrs. Gandhi nor General Manekshaw, nobody knew how the war would go. So it is completely wrong to say that the Indian Army knew that Mukti Bahini has been deployed, we'll go in, they'll roll over and we'll come out. It didn't happen like that. The truth is that the war was fought under extreme pressure, with nobody knowing which way the war would go, till as late as the 9th of January when Mujib comes back. And that is what is there in the book, which I think I'll leave the readers to read. But it was very, very complicated. It was touch and go right the way through. So I would say that, but finally, when the Pakistan Air Force is knocked out on the 7th morning, Sagat carries out the Sylhet heli lift. Why did he carry it out? He dropped the Gurkhas to pin down 3 brigades of the Pak army to prevent them from falling back to save Dhaka. Then he carries out the Dhaka, the Meghna heli lift. He carried 6,011 troops. And then the Indian army comes down from the north, from Meghalaya. 3 crack regiments come down, including the Marathas, and they come and converge with the Paras in Tangail. So I would submit to you that when people make that it is easy and we just went in and we did it, I just think that is being unfair to the people who fought the war.
It was not a cakewalk.
It was not a cakewalk, and there were lots of mistakes. And I spoke to a rear admiral. He says that God was sitting on our left shoulder, and there was a lot of luck which came our way.
Any last words on this, Iqbal? Anybody from the audience would like to ask a question? So thank you very much.